Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Forward Controls OPF-G Glock MOS plate for the RMR and SRO optics. You've probably heard me say it before. The Glock MOS system, mainly the Glock MOS plate, is trash. It's garbage. It's not well executed, and it hasn't been updated, and I'm sure Glock is aware of the shortcomings of their design. First problem, of course, with the MOS design, and this isn't like necessarily an attack on the MOS, but it's kind of justifying why so many people are building aftermarket plates for the Glock MOS platform. The plate itself is metal injection molded die cast, very similar process, if not the exact same process you use to make a Hot Wheels car, which is troublesome for a number of reasons. Main one being that the plates can come deformed or bent, and if you attempt to straighten them, they will just snap. Another issue with the plate is the overall thickness prevents very much of the screw, 4 or 5 threads, if that, from getting down into the slide to mount the plate to the gun, and then you mount the optic to the plate, and they sometimes come off. I've been teaching red dot classes, red dot specific handgun classes for a very long time at this point, and I've seen more than a few MOS plates fly off MOS guns, optic attached, during courses. My own personal experience with the MOS, I've broken numerous plates just from shooting the gun. If the plate has any bend in it whatsoever, it's going to flex up against those screw heads, and over time it's going to start to either stretch the screw, start to rip the threads out, or more likely the plate eventually is going to snap right there in the screw well, and then the other screw well will break, and then you have an optic that comes flying off the gun, and hopefully you're wearing iPro when that happens. It's like getting punched in the face by a small child, and then you have to play find the optic, which is not fun and shouldn't be happening at all, which is why a number of companies have stepped in to provide an aftermarket solution to an issue that the OEM manufacturer, in this case being Glock for the MOS platform, doesn't seem as interested in solving. What appealed to me right off the bat about the Forward Controls plate is the fact that it was from Forward Controls. And they are known in many circles for being exacting in the way that they approach design, tolerances, durability. So I was expecting, even though I was going to remain as objective as possible, as I always try to be in a review, I was expecting a well-executed product with a lot of thought that went into it. And I can tell you right now, just from the initial mounting of the plate, it mounts in the exact same way a traditional MOS plate mounts, and then you put the optic on top of it. But one thing I got is, well, it's not metal injection molded, so we can start, that's a big plus right there. Also, they incorporated fences into the plate, which is something that not every aftermarket company does with their plates that they offer for the MOS. So the optic has its linear support, but it's also got fences which snug the optic to the plate itself, which do help prolong the life of some of the optics out there. Now, the OPF-G is intended for the RMR and the SRO. You can mount a hollow sun to it, however, you're not going to get Forward Controls to sign off on that. They feel that the tolerances are probably a little not as exact, if you will, for mounting purposes for their plate. So while you can mount a hollow sun footprint or anything that's an RMR footprint to this plate, it's not recommended. It's not something I'd recommend either. I would buy this plate if you needed it for an RMR or an SRO. Now, for the plate, I'm going to put it through my 2,000 round review process, which, if you're not familiar, includes 2,000 rounds of fire, as well as the occasional, every 500 rounds, I'm going to do a drop test. For plate purposes, I'm doing the drop test to see if the plate shifts or in any way causes me to lose my zero. For the review process, I chose an RMR because my history with the RMRs is you can't knock these things out of zero just by dropping them. I've got a Type 2 RMR that's at 25, just over 25,000 rounds, which you can do easy math on that. That's a drop test every 500 rounds, and it's still on the same zero. So using the RMR for the review eliminates any kind of zero shift being attributable to the RMR. In the event that it happened, that was something I was going to have to check. but for drop test purposes, I'm seeing how durable the plate is with its mounting surfaces and interfaces. As far as features go, of course, it's an optic mounting plate, right? It is improved materials. It also comes with torque screws as opposed to Allen heads, which I really appreciate for tension purposes. Also, because Allen heads shouldn't be that small and they strip out very easily. With the RMR, I am occasionally going to have to remove it from the gun to change the battery. By using a Torx, I don't run the risk of stripping it out and then needing to drill it, especially if you use the wrong kind of thread locker. It just becomes a thing, and we don't want it to be a thing. So let's use Torx, and let's have products ship a Torx head versus Allen heads when it comes to mounting optics on handguns, regardless of the plate interface. And like I already said, and it's a small feature, and some people wouldn't necessarily even appreciate it, but I do, those fences that really lock the optic into the plate itself really appeal to me. That's something I like just based on my own testing of optic mounting systems that didn't have those. Some optics, actually, the additional recoil energy that can behave differently in the gun without those fences has killed some optics in the past. So having that option is pretty damn cool. Because this plate mounts an optic, I put the gun through an optic schedule testing. One-hand manipulation is a big deal. That's something that we teach a lot in handgun classes. For shooting, if you only have one hand available to you, how do you work the slide on the gun if you have to? Now, I'm using a Gen 5 Glock 17 MOS, but this is also available for a Gen 4. On the Gen 5, I've got ambient control, so that's not necessarily big of a concern. If I need to close the slide and the gun's in my left hand, I can use my thumb, or because I'm left-handed, I'll do what I've always done and just use my index finger. But you may not be the same. The intended user may not be the same. If you're right-handed and you end up with the gun in your left hand, you may not know how to work this thing as efficiently as maybe you want to or maybe you should. So manipulating the optic against something to work the slide is something that's very appealing, and it's something I would highly recommend you do. Also, if for whatever reason you need to rack the gun when the slide's not open, so I need to rack around because I had a failure to fire or something, I can manipulate right there off the optic body. It's something I'm going to teach people to do. That's about the only time I would teach people to use the optic body to manipulate the gun. It's something people are going to do anyway because it's just a good practice for that particular situation, or training and practicing for that particular type situation. So I did a lot of one-hand manipulations during the review process. No loss of zero. Of course, one of the big questions people have is, well, how does it handle, shooting? During this 2,000 round review process, what are you going to do? One of the very first things I do is the burn down. 500 rounds as quickly as I can get them through the gun. Because I'm an FFL SOT, I have a Glock 17 auto sear, well, just a Glock auto sear that fits that profile of Glock. I went ahead and threw it on my Gen 5 MOS, and I put 500 rounds through this gun really fast. So here's your burn down. First to last round, no issues. The plate didn't come flying off and hit me in the head. I checked my tension. One thing I really appreciate about Ford Controls is they specify, recommended torque is various thread locker. Instead of just letting people figure that out on their own, they're like, hey, here's the way you should do it based on our testing, based on the way that we intended this, based on the screw size, interfacing to the gun with the plate with the optic. So nothing loosened up, which is another thing that the burn down could show us. That gets the gun really hot, even though on a handgun, most of the heat's up here. And realistically, unless you have an auto sear too, you're probably never going to get your gun as hot as I got this one without substantial effort because, well, every mag was full auto. In fact, it probably not something you should be doing anyway, because the polymer frame on the Glock doesn't like that many rounds to be fired that quickly. In fact, I had to get the slide off the gun as soon as possible after the burn down to keep my dust cover from melting. I did get a little puff of flame there, but it wasn't that big of a deal because I was able to put some big mittens on, get the slide off the gun, let everything cool down, put it back together, get right back to work. Next question, of course, is if my gun takes some inadvertent hard contact, is the plate going to shear? Am I going to break a screw? Is the optic going to lose its zero? And that's a big concern coming from the MOS plates, because with the MOS plates, the answer to that question is maybe. So I want to make sure with any aftermarket plate, the answer to that question is no or very unlikely. So just like I would do with a red dot optic on a handgun, every 500 rounds I did a drop test. So over a 2,000 round, at least for this video purposes, that's 2,000 rounds fired. Right, real quick, here's a 5-round group I fired for zero confirmation, shooting 124 grain gold dot before the first drop test. And here's a 5-round group I fired after the last drop, the 4th drop. Far as I'm concerned, 0 maintained. So that's one less concern I have. Is there anything I don't like about the forward control design plate? Yeah, actually there is, but it's not necessarily forward control's fault. The plate's kind of tall, and that's material based, but it's also because Glock, in their infinite wisdom of a gun they design, and a gun they own, and a gun they can change anytime they want, they didn't make the footprint, or the shoe, if you will, very deep for the MOS platform, which means any plate you put on it is going to sit higher than I would probably like. So even though the forward control design plate is very thin, it's not able to sit as low as I would like it to. And that's just one man's opinion, but even with an SRO on this thing, it sits a little taller than I would like it to, but that's not really against forward controls. That's the MOS footprint that we have to contend with. So I would much rather being able to have a thinner plate. That may compromise the integrity of the plate. Even if they're made out of steel, you can only go so thin. So that's something I'm not necessarily going to be able to get. So I can't really say it's a bad thing that the plate is the thickness it is, because it kind of has to be what it is. And I can blame Glock and the MOS footprint before I blame the plate, because they definitely could have gone deeper in their design and their footprint than they did with the MOS. And hopefully in the next generation of Glock perfection, we'll see a deeper footprint, hopefully an improved mounting system altogether, but I'll take the deeper footprint if I can't get anything else, because I can always trust in aftermarket companies like Forward Controls to provide me a plate option. All things being equal and all things being considered, for law enforcement purposes, you're generally going to be stuck with an OEM manufactured system. So if you're going to be using a red dot on duty, you're probably not going to be able to get your gun milled, and you're probably not going to be able to use a modular milled system like the Unity Tactical or the Agency Arms EOS. So you're limited to whatever the manufacturer provides. And if your agency shoots Glock, and there's like an over 60% chance that they do, you're probably going to get an MOS. But you should be able to work into your policy the ability to use aftermarket plates, as long as they're approved by your RMR Rangemaster, whoever does that. And that's definitely the way I would recommend you write the policy. Now you have yet another option for an aftermarket plate system that's going to be substantially better than the one offered by Glock. And I would recommend that if you do anything you can to avoid using the MOS plate on duty, because it's not a matter of if it's going to break, it's a matter of when. As far as the OPF-G plate goes from Forward Controls, it's excellent in its simplicity, but it doesn't need to be complicated because it's an optic mounting plate. But just because it's an optic mounting plate doesn't mean a lot of thought did not go into the way that they designed it, the way they intended it, and the way that it's going to interface with the MOS system. So it is probably one of the best plates, if not the best plate, you're going to be able to get for a simplistic optic mounting system that's going to be durable and it's going to be handle whatever you realistically throw at it. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.